So with so many big name mangas ending lately or being on the verge of ending, with My Hero Academia and Jujutsu Kaisen being two prime examples, people, including myself, have started to realize that the age of new gen is over and it's time for a whole new generation of animes and mangas to come forth. So since all the current popular series are coming to an end, I figured that it's time for me to start reading some new mangas. Now, there's been a lot of talk about which mangas are going to take over the manga industry since all the popular ones are currently ending. There's a lot of talk about Kagurabachi, Gakyakura, Dan Dan Dan. However, the one I picked to read as my next manga is something you guys have probably heard of by now, Sakamoto Days. Now, for those of you who have not read it, do not worry because I'll be straying as far as I can from spoilers in this video. But if you haven't read Sakamoto Days or you don't know what it's about, let me catch you up a little bit. Sakamoto Days follows the story of a retired assassin known as Sakamoto. In his glory days, Sakamoto was known as the greatest assassin who had ever lived. But after falling in love, he decided to get married, have kids, and start a family for himself. However, at one point or another, his past ends up catching up to him and a bounty of 1 billion yen is placed on his head, putting him and his entire family in danger, forcing him back into the life of an assassin. However, all the years that Sakamoto spent being retired, he was slowly losing his skills, losing the edge that he once had, and he let himself go, becoming extremely overweight. And on top of all of that, he now has a new rule where he cannot kill anyone despite his previous life of him being an assassin. Now that the people who have not read it have a basic idea of what the story is about, let's get into my personal review of it. Now, since we're already on the topic of the story, let's just start off with that. Now, what came as a surprise to me was that despite this manga being about assassins and killing and murder and all these dark themes and tones, the story is rather happy for the most part. Everyone is pretty lighthearted. There's a lot of jokes, a lot of comedy, and overall, I was pretty happy reading it from start to finish. There were a very few amount of times where the story took a very dark turn or got really serious. Now, I know some people are in love with the dark, edgy type of stories, but I don't think Sakamoto Days is that kind of story. So if you want to read something really dark and gruesome, Sakamoto Days is probably not your type of manga. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of deaths, a lot of blood, but the approach Sakamoto Days takes towards it is that it doesn't really take those deaths that seriously. Despite a lot of deaths occurring in the manga and many characters constantly killing other characters in almost every single chapter they appear in, majority of the characters for the most part are pretty uplifting when they're on screen. Personally, I love the fact that the story has a rather happy tone to it, but I know that's not a lot of people's cup of tea, so if you want to read something that's darker or edgier, Sakamoto Days is probably not it for you. Now, the plot of the story is pretty basic. As I mentioned earlier, Sakamoto gets a bounty placed on him, and he now has to protect his wife and his kids. Along the way, obviously, he encounters his old friends, he makes new friends, and he basically has this big old family. And even though the plot is pretty basic, it's still very enjoyable to read. I had a blast reading it from start to finish. So if you were expecting this manga to be like the most complex, in-depth storyline ever written, I'm sorry, Sakamoto Days is also not gonna be it for you. Like, it's a pretty basic story with a basic formula, but it's enjoyable, it's fun to read, and even though it's basic, it's still good. Some people see basic and automatically think that it's bad. There's nothing bad about it. Just because it's not the most complex thing ever doesn't mean it's not great. Now let's get to talking about our main character, Taro Sakamoto. Taro Sakamoto, in my opinion, is a very unique main character because majority of shonen main characters start off with a very inexperienced kid who slowly has to learn his way around the world and get stronger and stronger. Sakamoto Days follows the story of somebody who is already past his prime. He's lived through his glory days and he has retired. He has all the experience already. However, despite having the experience needed to already be strong, Sakamoto throughout the entire story is sort of retracing his steps in order to slowly gain back the strength he once had in his prime. So I find it really unique that instead of getting the typical inexperienced young shonen MC, this time we're getting the experienced older shonen MC who is just simply trying to find a way to get back his prime strength. And the story, in my opinion, does this in a really good way because at first, Sakamoto is overpowering pretty much everyone he's fighting against. And you, as the reader, are instantly gonna think, of course, Sakamoto, the legendary assassin, is going to beat everyone who he fights. This story is going to be pretty boring. However, as the story goes on, we realize just how far Sakamoto has fallen in terms of strength because we get other high tier characters who are constantly telling Sakamoto like, hey, you can't really hang with us anymore. You're out of your prime. And Sakamoto realizes this and he realizes that he needs to get stronger yet again. One aspect I think Sakamoto Days really exceeds in is its side cast. The side cast in Sakamoto Days is one of the most enjoyable casts of characters I have seen in a while in manga. From chapter 1 all the way to the latest chapter, I have enjoyed every single side character that has been introduced. They are all fun, they're all compelling, and they're all interesting. In fact, Sakamoto Days, I've noticed, focuses a lot more on its side characters a lot of the time than it does on its main character. And if this was any other series, I'd probably think, of course, I want to see more of the main character than I see of the side characters. However, since the side characters in Sakamoto Days are so good, I have no issue when the entire story revolves around them. I can go a full 10 chapters without seeing Sakamoto once, and I will not have a single issue about it because I enjoy the side characters that much. Especially when the story starts shifting to focus on the order members like Nagamo or Shishiba. That's how you know the story is about to be peak and you are going to be glued to the manga. Now, how does Sakamoto Days do when it comes to villains? In my opinion, Sakamoto Days has a very solid lineup of villains, especially when it comes to their main villain, Slur or Uzuki or however you want to call him. The thing I love most about the villains in Sakamoto Days is that they're not really villains. Of course, they're the antagonists of the story, but their motives are very compelling and you can see where they're coming from most of the time. So a lot of times you don't know who to root for. You don't know if you want to root for the main characters and the order or if you want to root for the so-called villains because frankly their motives are pretty justifiable again most of the time. The main villain of Sakamoto Days, Uzuki, is one of my current favorite villains in New Gen manga. Now, I don't know if it's the recency bias or not, but I just feel like he is one of the most interesting villains I have seen in a long time. The other villains in Sakamoto Days, in my opinion, are just alright. They're nothing really crazy, but Uzuki is definitely a top tier villain in my opinion, and he makes the story so much better, and every time he's on screen, I know something interesting is going to happen, and he is one of the most interesting characters in the entire manga. Now, lastly, let's get into a big thing, and that is fights. Ooh, I cannot wait until this gets animated because I know these fights are going to go insane on screen. I mean, if I was hyped reading them, I can only imagine how hyped I'm gonna be watching them. The fights are easily the best thing in the series, and I mean, it doesn't come as a surprise when the entire manga revolves around assassins and killing. Obviously, it was going to have a lot of fights, and thankfully, the fights are the best thing that the series has to offer. They are so fun to read. I don't think I didn't enjoy a single fight in the entirety of the manga, especially if it's an order member fighting. That's how you know the fight is going to be top tier. Every single time an order member fights somebody in the story, no matter the outcome of the fight is amazing. The order by far has the best fights in the entire series, especially Shishiba and Nagamo in my opinion. So should you read Sakamoto Days? Well, in my opinion, if you're looking for a manga that's mainly action based, has a lot of insane fights, great moments, great characters, and is pretty lighthearted overall, definitely give Sakamoto Days a try. I guarantee you, if you're into the things I just listed, you will absolutely love the series. My personal ranking and rating of the series is going to be a solid 8 out of 10. I feel like that's very fair for it. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe, and let me know what you guys want to see next. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys on the next one.